Welcome. I'm your host, Steve Lentini, for the podcast Different Thinking for Different Times. And different thinking, I developed it after having my near-death experience, but we're not going to go into that today. But I'm going to talk about what I discovered on the other side. We shouldn't call death death. We should call it what's next. But what's next, what doesn't go with us, or at least for me in my experience, was that little voice that's in my head. Hopefully it's in many others' head, but if it's only in mine, I can tell you it didn't go with me. And that little voice that's constantly comparing me to others or wanting me to judge people or making me better than others or giving the number one salute sign in traffic, that's a reactive voice and it's very small minded. And what I noticed coming back into my body after that experience was I could learn to run that voice. I could learn to manage it. Rainer Maria Rilke in the 1800s called that voice the little hooligan. And he used to say to people, will you let that little hooligan run you or will you run it? George Ivanovich Gurdjieff called it the machine and asked the same question. Will you let the machine run you or will you run it? And I can say that we can maybe get there 60 to 70% of the time because we're human. We're human. We're all flawed humans, and it's okay. And what I say to people when that little voice does take them over and they become reactive, the automatic thought that leads to an automatic response typically is not healthy about probably 95% of the time. What I say is when you catch yourself, you could say, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And even if that little voice brings up a past mistake or an error in judgment or some humiliation, you could say the same thing. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and just get a sense of humor. And leading into that, right, having a sense of humor about oneself and about one's job and in the workplace. Today's guest is Greg Kettner, and he's trademarked WorkHappy. And I want him to tell you all about it because he's the guy with the experience, but I'm fascinated by his work. I've listened to his TEDx, and if you go to his website, you're going to learn a lot of amazing things and perhaps even reach out to Greg. So, Greg, take over.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And like you're saying, humor is good for us. It's good for our health, our heart health, and our head health. The old saying, people always say, laughter is the best medicine. That's not true if you have diarrhea. That's not. Probably not the best solution for you. But yeah, work happy came about during COVID. I've done career sales. I was in professional sports. I sold for the National Hockey League, for Major League Soccer, startups, software companies, a bunch of stuff. And during COVID, when COVID started, I was director of sales for a local chamber of commerce here in town, working with sponsorships and memberships. And after one of our meetings, I said to my manager, I said, well, I will see you tomorrow and blah, blah, blah. He says, oh, by the way, we eliminated your job. And this was right around the beginning of COVID. I was like, oh, that's a good joke. And I almost hung up. He's like, no, I'm serious. We eliminated your job, so come and grab your things tomorrow. So that's how I got told that I was going into COVID with no job. And my first reaction was visceral. It was upset. It was like, how could somebody do this to me? And I wanted to write a letter to the paper and put it all over social media. But thankfully, my wife, I went and talked to her, and she's like, calm down, go golfing. Spend the rest of the day going golfing. And so the next week or so, I found out that I had a runway with unemployment insurance that I'd never used before. I had 8 months. So I had a bit of a runway to figure out what I was going to do next. And at that time, I mean, nobody knew what we were going to do, right? How work was going to be or life was going to be. And so during that week, we were just talking. And one night she said, what would you do? What would you want to do if you could do anything? And I said, well, if I could do anything and make any amount of money, I would go back and do stand-up comedy. But that is not good for a marriage or the pocketbook. And so she said, why don't you go and help other people work happy? So she's the one that kind of came up with the idea and the term, and I started thinking about that. I said, yeah, I've always had a positive attitude. I always look on the bright side of life, and I love people, love being on stage and making people laugh. And I thought, well, why not take the humor with my knowledge in sales, and how to serve people and help people solve challenges, and go and teach that. And so here we are 4 years later. I'm getting to meet amazing people like you around North America, around the world, and every day I get up and my question is, who can I serve today? Who can I make laugh? Who can I make work happy? Who can I have a conversation with about mental health? Because I think when we talk and we're on the same level and we show empathy and we open up, we all realize that we're going through a lot of the same stuff, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
the joys or the sadness, the highs or the lows, but we're better together, and that's my mission, to help a million people work happy.
Yeah. Yeah. The vulnerability is amazing when people finally get to that space and they realize they're not alone, right? It's like that little voice. I'm not the only one with it.
Yeah,
I say kiddingly when I talk, I'll say by a show of hands, who's got that little voice incessantly
yeah.
talking to them. And
We
then
all
when
do.
people raise their hands, I say, whew, thank God, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah,
But that's the thing that goes through people's heads, right? They think that they're the only one going through what they're going through.
yeah.
So tell me about what you've discovered with Work Happy, how it all started, like the first few times you did it and how you got a TEDx talk, and give us some background on that, because I think it's such a great topic and it's timely for today.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we need it more now than ever, right? So I decided, okay, well, let's try this. I have an 8 month runway before I run out of a bank account, and I just started googling work happy coaches, work happy speakers, happiness, and I just found a lot of amazing resources. And I thought, you know what, I can pull all this together and go out and talk to people. And one, how do we work happy? Because 68% of people now are actively looking for another job. They're not happy where
Wow.
they are, right? And the whole
Wow.
adage is we quit our managers, we don't quit our job. There's people who don't enjoy their jobs, but I've worked with construction companies, and those guys love what they do. They love being outside, they love building stuff. But where the fault is when there's a manager who's not empathetic, not listening, and just going, all right, you guys have to do this by such and such a time, right? They're
Yeah.
not listening to
Yeah.
their people. And so I've really found a niche and what I teach, Steve, is not rocket science, um, but it's just taking common sense, life experience, and the golden rule basically is treating other people how I want to be treated, right? When I sold, I never wanted to be micromanaged and told what to do and what not to do and make 100 calls and do this and do that. I had an amazing sales manager when I was working for the Vancouver Canucks. His name is Jordan Thorstensen, and his thing was, what do I need to do to help get rid of the rocks that are in your way, so that you can go out and sell. You can talk to people about hockey. You can make money. We have a full stadium, right? And there's a big difference from somebody telling me I've got to make 100 calls a day or I'm going to lose my job, or taking me out in the middle of a hockey game. It's 3-3. The crowd's going nuts, and my manager going, "This is what you helped create."
Wow.
Completely different, right? And
Wow.
knowing that I helped fill 18,000 seats, obviously I wasn't the only one of the only one. There was a team of 20 of us, but I've just realized over the years that when we work together and we work for a common good, and when we talk to each other and listen and ask what people need, we get so much better. And when we put people before profits, we have better health, we have better productivity, we have less turnover, better mental health. And by talking about mental health, we can save lives. I can tell you story after story of people, because someone said something to them. They changed their narrative, they changed their plan, and they're still with us today because somebody listened to them and somebody said, I care.
Yeah. Made an impact. And
Yeah.
something you said was interesting to me. the fact that 68% of people are looking for a job, number one. And then number two, you met a boss who said, what can I do to remove the rocks in your way to your success?
Yeah.
Instead of what you hear, I still hear people doing this, and I've done some consulting over the last 20 years and been in companies that amazing where the managers are still saying, all right, what did you close lately?
What's your pipeline?
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
you met somebody that was cheering you and then brings you to a game so you can say, you see what you're doing? You see what the impact is?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So what
And
other
that's what you have to
areas?
do, I think, as a leader, right? You need to find out what triggers your people. Some people, it's money. I want to make as much money as I can.
Yeah.
For me, it's how much happiness can I bring? How can I serve people? Because
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer, and I've lived it, and I've seen it, and I've done it myself. That when we love what we do, the money does follow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it has taken 4 years to build up the business, but I have a lifestyle now where if I want to go and watch my daughter play volleyball, I get to go watch her play volleyball at 11 o'clock in the morning. Or if
Yeah.
I'm not having a work happy day and I need to go golfing, I don't have to ask my boss if I can go golfing and take
Yeah.
2 hours off. I go do it, and yeah, I'll stay up an extra 2 hours at night working, but it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, and um, when you think of having your own schedule, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That helps you work happy. So maybe there's a nugget in there for companies, right, to let people have more flex time and they might be more productive.
Yeah. Well, and there's now studies that are coming out, and I mean, I think there's a study for anything that you want to believe or your narrative to be.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
I saw a recent study where they're saying that some people, depending on who they are more productive, right? When they do work from home, when they're not there. Uh, I
Yeah.
had uh, I had a friend. He called me up and said, "Hey, I don't know what to do with this one gentleman. He was a maintenance guy, and he said he's been a great worker for the last 3 years, and all of a sudden, he's showing up 10 to 15 minutes late every day." And he goes, "I don't know. Do I fire him? What do I do?" And I said, "Why don't you ask him? Why is he showing up late? Why don't you have a conversation?" He's like, "Oh, that's a good idea." Well, it turns out that this guy was living with a gal, and they had broken up, but they had kids, and it was her responsibility to take the kids to work or to school in the morning, and
Mhm.
he would pick them up in the afternoon. And they had broken up, so now he was a single dad again, and having to take his kid to school in the morning and pick him up. And so everything was shifted because when school starts and work starts, and so he said, and so my friend just said, "Well, how about this? How about you start at 8:30 and work till 5:30?" And the guy goes, "That'd be awesome." Right? So his first initial reaction was like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to go find somebody else. This guy's perfect, except he doesn't show up on time." He had a 10, 15-minute conversation. And how much better is that guy gonna be working for him when his boss says, "Why don't we do this so you can have time
He's
to
going
meet
to
kids?"
remember it forever.
Right?
He's going to remember it forever.
Absolutely. Right?
Something else. Yeah. And something else you said early on was when you were starting the business. And that, to me, is an example of infinite thinking. You Googled other people doing the work and found that there was people doing the work, right? So there was a market, and you weren't afraid that there were other people doing it, which is a prosperity or an abundance, a magnanimous mindset. It didn't keep you from going like, oh no, there's other people doing it. I can't do this.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. If there's an abundance, then there's room for you. Now, that doesn't mean if you don't find anybody else doing what you're doing that you wouldn't have a path to blaze, but it's also an indicator that there's not a lot of market for it yet.
Yeah.
So you found there was a market, and then so how did you get? What happened? How did you get your first gig, and how did it all unfold?
My first gig was at a local Rotary Club. here in town.
That's a place to start,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, I was a member when I was working with the chamber, and then the new manager came in and said, no, that's my job. I get to go to Rotary. So I wasn't able to go to Rotary anymore, but I knew a lot of people there. And so when I had my first, I cobbled together a Work Happy talk for about 20 minutes and reached out to them and said, hey, I have this idea and this talk. And they said, sure. And so I got up in front of 200 people, and and the reaction was just overwhelming. I mean, I probably talked to people longer after my talk than I actually the 20 minutes of my talk. Right? People are like, oh man, I totally get that. I'm stressed at work. I'm burnt out. I feel like I don't matter. And so, in just listening and continuing to give these talks, I've just found the challenges that most people are having, and how do we fix them? Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
it, Steve, and you know this, I mean, you've been consulting a lot longer than I have, is communication,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you and I both have different backgrounds. I'm from the West Coast, you're from the East Coast. Social norms are different, sales are different, everything's different, right? But here we are
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation on how do we sell better? How do we help instead of sell? Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
building
Mm-hmm.
relationships. It's not building a pipeline. You're
Mm-hmm.
collecting people and stories, and it's so much easier. So I found a niche, and there was guys that I reached out to on LinkedIn and said, hey, I want to get into the speaking world and the coaching world, and a lot of no responses. But there was a sales coach, Bill Gertine, out of Chicago. He wrote a book, 800-Pound Gorilla, about ticket sales, and he had came to the Vancouver Canucks back in the day when I was just a rookie salesperson, and I remembered him, and I sent him a LinkedIn message. He said I'd be more than happy to take time and help you out. So we got on a call, and he's like, I would do this, I wouldn't do that, do this, don't do this. And now we're colleagues, and we're both successful, and we're still have a lot of business. I haven't taken away any of his business, and he hasn't taken away
Right.
any of mine.
No. Right. That's the truth people discover when they let go of the idea that
Yeah,
they wouldn't have there wouldn't be enough. And part of that message is the small minded thinker, the acorn brain says you got to go out there and get.
yeah,
And it's really the opposite. You go out and give, and
give,
then you get over time, and you let go of where it's going to come back from, because
yeah,
that's not our job in life, right?
yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Now, what led to the TEDx?
I had always wanted to do TEDx, but I didn't know what kind of angle. And so again, this was during COVID, and I've always had the ability to make people laugh. I'm not the funniest person, but I've never done a stand up comedy show or been in a group of people where people just walked away because they're like, oh, Greg's not funny. Um, and so I had an idea. I wanted to write a TEDx talk on how to make the world a better place with laughter. And I've had a couple of unique stories. One, getting up in front of 4,000 people in Vegas, impromptu, and doing stand-up comedy to a
Wow.
sold-out show in Vegas. Another time, I got to meet and work with my hero, Robin Williams. And so I put together this TEDx talk about how we can change the world with laughter, because when we laugh with each other, it's universal, right? When we laugh,
Yeah.
we connect. And then once we
Yeah.
connect with somebody, our hearts are opened up. And when our hearts are opened up, then we can have these deep, meaningful conversations and make the world a better place. And not
Yeah.
just because we're laughing is not the solution. It's kind of the glue that starts the whole process, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was able to do that. It was during COVID, so um, everybody was spaced out 6 seats by 2 rows. So there's the theater held, I think, about 1,200 people, and there's probably about 300 in it. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it was
Because
it was
of COVID.
great. It was good for me, and I've just gotten a lot of good feedback where, people will laugh during the TEDx, people will cry, but the message is go out, make people laugh, and make the world a better place.
Yeah. And then what's the what's the main message, or what is the theme in the when you go to the workplace and help a company's culture, and what's the message that
Yeah.
you don't have to give the whole talk. I don't want you to give it away for free, but what's some of the message that really rings true for people? Because obviously you're growing and they're hiring you, people are calling you and talking
Yeah.
about it. So what is the thing that you've discovered or noticed about it? And I'm sure it changes over time, but what have you what have you learned, and what are you sharing with people? What are you leaving with people with?
I guess the biggest thing I'm leaving people is with hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there is a better way to do things. There is a better way to work. There is a better way to treat your people, and there is help, and we can save lives by talking about mental health. So the two tracks or the two keynotes that I have is how do we work happy, and that's pretty much how do we put people before profits, right? If we
Yeah.
take care of our people, if we give them patterns and or means of doing things, that's when the profits really kick in, right? Because people are really struggling right now with finding good people and burnout and turnover.
Yeah.
And some people estimate that's over 150% to replace an employee by the time you get rid of them, find somebody else, hire, interview, train. So if
Yeah.
somebody's making $50,000 a year, let's say, right, by the time you find somebody to replace them, it's 150,000. Why
Wow.
not save a bunch of money and have some conversations? Maybe that person's struggling with childcare. Maybe they need some training. I was talking to one client, and they found out that this one person was a great person on the phone and everything, but they didn't seem like they were as far along as they should be.
Mm-hmm.
For all the training they went through, and they found out, they went and had a conversation, found out the person was dyslexic. So they had a reading
Wow.
impairment, right? And so they helped them with his dyslexia, and then magic happened. So it
Wow.
just continues to put people before your profits, have conversations. And then the second talk is how do we talk about mental health? Um, it's amazing. I've literally had people tell me. I was speaking in Kalamazoo back in November. I was doing the closing keynote. My whole thing about Let's Talk Mental Health is let's reach out, right? I'm a can opener, Steve. I'm not a
Yeah.
I'm not a counselor or a therapist or a doctor, but I can get people and sharing my story and say, hey, I go to therapy, right? And if a skinny John Goodman can go to therapy, anybody can go to therapy. And so I met this gentleman at the conference the year before, and we became friends and followed each other on social media. Again, the whole thing is just reach out when you're struggling, whatever it is. And so after the after the keynote, he came up and he said, "Hey, I really appreciated your message." And I said, "Well, it's kind of you've heard all of it before. What stood out? Because I wanted to know how can I be better for when I talk." And he said, "No, that message, reach out, it works and it resonated." And I said, "Tell me more." And he said, "Well, 6 weeks ago, I had a plan to end my life." He said, "I left my work, I got in my truck, went and bought a gun. And between the gun store and his favorite fishing hole where he was going to end his life, he said, for some reason, I thought to reach out." He said, "You always said to reach out." He goes, "I pulled the car over. I called my sister and we talked for a whole hour. She came and picked me up. I'm in therapy and I'm doing much better. So thank you for telling me to reach out."
Wow.
And again, I'm just the messenger, right? But when people
Yeah.
feel and know that what other people are going through, they're like, okay, there is hope. People do care about
Yeah.
me, and they're
Yeah.
concerned enough for me to get help. So
Yeah.
hope is probably is. I'm a hope dealer. I sell hope, but I also give the practical ways on how what are the 9 steps to work happy. How do we
Yeah.
as a company create a culture where we can talk about mental health and it's okay. It's not shameful or weird. You know, it's an actual thing, and by talking about it, we can get people help.
Well, the mental health that you talk about is sometimes people really get stuck in listening to that voice.
Yeah.
And Shirzad Chamine wrote the book Positive Intelligence, and he developed a PQ coaching program. I did take the he gave coaches a grant for free
Okay.
to if you're a coach, right, you get a 6 week course for free. Smart on his part. He was enrolling people because then they
Yeah.
ask you afterwards, do you want to become a PQ coach?
Yeah.
Which I did, and I can tell you that managing that voice is one thing, but reaching out and having hope is another thing, because some people get stuck in trying to manage that voice instead of understanding
Yeah.
it lies. It's a lie. And that's when they need help. If it's so powerful, they need to do what you just said, reach out and talk to somebody about it. And
Yeah.
in the workplace, it's not talked about very
No.
often about, hey, if you're going through something in your department or in your area or in your task, if you're a manager, and it's got you in a place where you're really stuck listening to this little voice, just share it with us, because it might be just that it isn't necessarily severe manic depression, right? Because
Yeah.
people make mistakes when they feel sad or feel depressed.
Yeah. And it can also start, small. It can be anxiety, a work issue, or a relationship issue, or overwhelm, or whatever it is. Right. Before I got into this, I thought, okay, mental health, you're either bipolar or suicidal. Am I going to catch it if I talk about it? Am I going to say the right or wrong thing?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a huge spectrum, right? I mean, there's over 50 different challenges that people have. One of my on my mental health is ADHD, right? I'm a squirrel,
Mm-hmm.
right? But through therapy and medication and writing down every morning what are the three things I have to do, I'm able to manage it better. And then stuff's
Mm-hmm.
not bouncing around all my head. Meditation helps me as well too. When that squirrel brain, so I have the acorn brain and a squirrel brain, I think, right?
Uh,
But once I went and
yeah,
got help for my ADHD, it's life is so much better, and I can get stuff done, and I get motivated right when I get my to do list checked off. So
yeah,
everybody's
yeah.
going
Well,
through
ADHD is huge today. It's much bigger, and I'm sure it hasn't increased. It's just now it's talked about and it's discovered that it's been there probably all the time.
it. Yeah.
But now, thankfully, people can share about it. So, in the workplace, what is the thing that you suggest for people to do to make their culture and their environment more work happy?
Uh, there's a lot of things. I think one of the major ones is just, first of all, is just finding out what your team wants and needs. Obviously, you're running a business and you have to have direction and you have to have goals and you have to drive to get there. But if you can get people on board and get their input, I read a study recently where they were saying that people now would rather, instead of getting a $10,000 raise at work, would rather feel like their voice is heard, that they matter, that they get a pat on the back, and that that their employees know who their kids are, who their dog is, or if a pet
Wow.
passes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes it's just that little human touch, right? But when we have those
Mm-hmm.
conversations, say, you know what, we hired you for a reason. We know you're great at what you do. How can we, like my manager did, how can we get out of the way, clear the rocks, so that you can perform to your best ability,
Yeah, I love that. I
right? And
love that.
and just creating that culture. And it starts, a lot of it can boil up from the bottom up, but it's a lot easier, especially having a culture where people talk about mental health. I had one manager asked me, he said, "Well, what do I do?" And I said, "Well, have you ever gone to counselor or struggled with your mental health?" And he says, "Back in college." He said, I had a lot of anxiety when it came to testing, and my parents took me and I went 3 or 4 sessions to a counselor, and they really helped me with my anxiety for taking my test. It was a lot easier to take my test. So I said, well, that's the story you need to tell, right? Because when you as a manager or leader get up there and be vulnerable and said, you know what, back in college I was struggling with anxiety. My parents got me some counseling. I went, did it, loved it, worked for me, right? And
Yeah.
when you say that, everybody below you was like, huh, well, George went to counseling. George
Right.
struggled with anxiety. I struggle. I'm not get in trouble if I ask HR, hey, how do I help with
Right.
my anxiety or my
Right.
overwhelm? Or
Right.
maybe your relationship with your spouse has gone sideways, or kids, or finances. It can be any
Yep.
one of those things.
Yep.
And we've all had that. I mean, you and I, Steve, we've had problems with finances, with relationships, with kids. Like we've all done it, but nobody's talking about it, and we just need to
No.
help each
Yeah. Yeah, it brings up a point that a lot of people think their bosses are perfect. Again, they're the only one with what's going on in their head, right?
Yeah,
So
for
this is a
sure.
good point to tell everybody. I can share that you go to Greg Kettner,
Yeah.
GregKettner.com,
Yep.
and you'll see a lot of different things on his website. He's got a podcast. Tell us about the podcast.
Yeah, it's just called the Work Happy podcast, and I just talk to people and get knowledge from them, right? And 4 years ago when I started out the podcasting, I was like, oh, I want to see what famous person I can get on my podcast, because I was thinking me mentality, not we,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
now it's how can I give value, and how can these other people share what's worked for them,
Yeah.
right, to help
Yeah.
them. So
Get
tips and
the
tricks on,
information
on how to work happy, and also too on there I do a monthly work happy masterclass. So you can sign up for it. It's
coming
once a
up
month,
June 19th, everybody.
June 19th, 30 minutes. And it's just a way for me to give more information to people who might be struggling, might not have the resources, or might not be the right person. But just
Mhm.
to share, and we do a Q&A. And then the last thing that I do that I really have enjoyed, I started doing Friday Funnies. So it's HR approved, whether it's a cartoon or a video or a meme or whatever. So I do that, and on that mailing list is probably about 1,200 now. It's short and sweet. It's every Friday, and all you need to do is sign up for that. And then out of that, during COVID, I also um, started a group on Facebook called the Humor Lab, because I wasn't able to make people laugh and get out and be social and whatnot. And so one night, there may have been a bottle of wine involved. And I thought, oh, this would be a great idea. And so I started this thing called the Humor Lab, and I put a couple of jokes on there. Two rules is no politics, and it's got to be PG-13, because I wanted both my daughter and my mom to read it. And I woke up the next morning, there was 128 people in the group. That
Wow.
was 3.5 years ago, and now I think it's 48,000.
Wow.
So it's just all these people sharing their sense of humor in a clean, non-political way. And I've had stories after stories of people reaching out to me and saying, "Thank you so much." When I'm having a rough day, I go to the Humor Lab, and so that's
Now,
my mojo, is making
how do
people laugh.
people find that? How do people find that, Greg?
Oh, the Humor Lab is just on Facebook. It's called the Humor Lab.
Humor Lab on Facebook. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great. That's great.
So
And your TEDx, if they Google TEDx, what do they do? Just Google Greg Kettner on TEDx?
yeah,
Search
yeah.
you?
They can find that on my website too. It's just Greg Kettner TEDx, and I just recorded my second one about a month ago.
Oh,
How to take
great.
a so
How to take the
because I've
what?
always struggled. How to take a compliment?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've always struggled, right? Somebody says, "Oh, thank you very much." I'm like, "Oh, don't thank me. I don't deserve it." Well, you're just poo-pooing on what somebody else is feeling about you, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
and if you want to know a secret, how to take a compliment, say thank you,
Yeah. Say thank you. Yeah.
right? Because when we
Instead of
do
saying,
that,
oh, Steve, you got this nice reddish shirt on. Wow, this old rag?
yeah, oh, well, thank you, right? And then that might turn into a story of where you got the shirt, or why you wear the shirt, or if I compliment you on your baseball hat, right? You're gonna start telling me a story about why you're a Yankees fan, because your dad was. He went to the ballpark, and blah blah blah. I mean, I know you didn't meet Babe Ruth, at that age, but right. But when you say thank you, it starts a whole nother conversation, and you don't have that awkwardness, and you get to
Yeah.
find out more and more about people.
Yeah. Well, and it completes the circle of giving and receiving, right? When it's the same thing about a sandwich. If somebody says, "Come on, let me buy you a sandwich." No, 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 thank you. I'm good. I can take care of myself. What's happening there is blocking the feeling that you get when you give someone a compliment or offer to buy a sandwich and they say, "Great, thank you." Think about how you feel
Yeah,
because you've just denied that person that feeling,
yeah,
and maybe that would help people say, "Oh, great lunch, thank you," or "You love my shirt, great, thank you." Yeah.
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 No, for
For the
sure.
work I did last week, wow, thank you, right? And
Yeah.
taking the acknowledgement. Yeah, I love that. All right. As we close, is there anything you want to leave people with? Anything I didn't cover? You want to
No,
give
thank
your
you.
website another plug? Go ahead. Tell them how to
No,
get you, how to find
yeah,
you.
no, I thank you for all you do. Thank you for having me on here. And
Yeah,
the one
thank
thing I want to leave with everybody is if you're struggling with your mental health, whether it's finances, your kid, your job, whatever your situation, reach out. Reach out to Steve, reach out to me, reach out to somebody because we all deserve the help that we can get.
you.
And
Reach out
and
to, yeah.
when we do that, we're better. And if you're struggling at work and I can help you out or give you some tips or tricks, more than happy. I'm all over social media at Greg Kettner, but if I can be of service, let's have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I'm grateful. Thank you for taking time out and sharing your wisdom. And hopefully,
Thank you.
somebody gets the message. And remember to leave your window open.
Yes.
Thank you,
Not my
Greg.
fly, my window.
Your window. Thank you, Greg.
Well, we go with a laugh, Steve.
You did. Thank you. Bye, Greg.
Bye.